All right, so are you ready to totally rewire your brain? Because in this deep dive, we're going to be looking at how to think directly in English.
Ooh, that sounds intense.
It is. But the payoff is huge. We're talking next level fluency here. I've got a whole stack of your articles and guides right here, and they're all about breaking that translation habit.
Yeah, so many people get stuck in that translation trap. It's like they're constantly hitting a mental speed bump every time they try to speak.
Exactly. And the sources really dive deep into this. They
Yeah.
talk about how translating in your head just slows you down, leads to more mistakes. It even makes it harder to find the right words.
And it can really impact your confidence too.
Yeah, for sure. Because you're so busy translating, you're not really connecting with the language of the people you're talking to.
Exactly. It's like there's this wall between you and the language.
Okay, so then what's the point of all this brain rewiring? What do we gain by thinking directly in English?
Well, imagine understanding English instantly, like without even thinking about it. Imagine speaking fluently and naturally, even pronouncing words correctly without overthinking it.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see how that would be pretty amazing.
It's like unlocking a whole new level of communication.
Okay, I'm convinced.
Yeah.
But how do we actually start doing this? I mean, how do we go from translating to thinking in English?
Well, the sources suggest starting small, like really small.
Okay, like how small are we talking?
Like just naming the objects around you in English,
Yeah.
your phone, your lamp, that coffee mug you're always misplacing.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that one. But it sounds almost too simple, doesn't it?
It might sound simple, but it's actually building those crucial neural pathways. You're bypassing the translation step and creating a direct link between the object and its English name.
So it's like creating a mental shortcut.
Exactly. And the sources suggest taking it a step further, too.
Oh, how so?
By narrating your day in English, even like the really mundane stuff, brushing your teeth, making coffee, walking the dog,
Yeah.
just get those words flowing.
So it's about making English a constant presence in your mind.
Right. And the sources talk about talking to yourself in English too, like your inner monologue. Describe your surroundings, think through your to-do list, anything to keep those mental gears turning in English.
It's like turning your life into a 204/7 English lesson without having to actually go to class.
Exactly. And, there's this really interesting technique that the sources talk about. It's called visualizing instead of translating.
Ooh, that sounds kind of cool. How does that work?
So instead of trying to mentally translate the word apple, you'd actually picture an apple in your mind.
Ah, I get it. So
Yeah.
you're connecting the image directly to the English word without the whole translation process.
Exactly. It's like creating a mental picture dictionary.
That's so much more effective than just memorizing word lists.
And don't forget about those common English sentence structures. The sources emphasize how important it is to master those patterns so you can build sentences naturally without relying on translation.
Oh yeah, those are super important. Like once you have those structures down, you don't have to keep stopping and translating in your
You
head.
can just let the words flow.
So it's like having a mental blueprint for speaking English fluently.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got visualizing, mastering sentence patterns, and surrounding ourselves with English. What else can we do to immerse ourselves in the language?
Well, we can't forget about listening to and imitating native English speakers.
Yeah.
Movies, podcasts, audiobooks, all that good stuff.
Right, it's like training your ear to hear the natural rhythm of the language.
You'll start picking up on all those subtle nuances that you wouldn't get from a textbook.
It's like absorbing the language through osmosis.
And speaking of real-life application, we can't forget about the importance of conversation.
Oh yeah, that's where the rubber meets the road. It's where you really get to put all these techniques into practice.
And it can be intimidating at first, I know, but the more you do it, the easier it gets.
It's like anything else, right? The more you practice, the more comfortable you become.
Exactly. And, the sources actually acknowledge that it's not always going to be easy.
Oh, for sure. There are going to be times when you forget a word, make a mistake, or just feel completely lost.
But that's totally normal. It happens to everyone, even native speakers.
So it's all part of the process.
Exactly. The sources encourage us to, shift our perspective and see those stumbles as opportunities to learn.
So instead of getting frustrated when you mess up, you can use those moments to figure out how to do better next time.
You're turning those mistakes into valuable lessons.
I like that. It's like turning those mental speed bumps into detours that actually lead you to a better understanding of the language.
Exactly. And there's one thing that the sources talk about that really resonated with me. It's about what to do when you just can't seem to find the right word.
Oh yeah, that tip of the tongue feeling. It's the
Yeah.
worst.
It can really throw you off. But the sources suggest using simpler words, descriptions, even gestures to get your point across.
So it's about being resourceful and finding a way to communicate, even when your vocabulary fails you.
It's like that game where you have to describe a word without actually saying it.
Yeah. It's like charades for language learning.
Exactly.
So the goal isn't to be perfect, it's to be effective.
Right. It's about connecting with people and sharing ideas, not about sounding like a dictionary.
Okay, so we've talked about practice, mistakes, resourcefulness. What about motivation? How do we stay focused on this whole thinking in English thing, especially when it gets tough?
You know, that's a great question, and the sources offer some really helpful advice on that.
Like what?
Well, one thing they emphasize is finding your intrinsic motivation.
What does that mean exactly?
It means connecting with those personal reasons why you want to learn English.
So it's less about external rewards, like getting a good grade, and more about that internal satisfaction of actually being able to use the language.
Exactly. Like being able to watch a movie without subtitles or having a conversation with someone from another country.
So it's about finding that joy in the learning process itself.
And the sources talk about celebrating those small victories along the way, too.
Yeah, that's important. Like, did you finally understand a podcast episode without rewinding it 5 times? Did you manage to order food at a restaurant without completely butchering the pronunciation? Celebrate those wins.
They might seem small, but those little victories can really keep you motivated.
Okay, so intrinsic motivation, celebrating small wins. Anything else?
The sources also talk about making learning English fun.
Okay, that sounds way more appealing than just drilling grammar rules.
It is. Find activities that you genuinely enjoy and that make you want to keep coming back for more, like watching your favorite TV shows in English or listening to podcasts about topics you're passionate about.
So it's about making it a part of your life, not just something you have to do.
And don't forget about connecting with other learners.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Like joining a language exchange group or finding an online community where you can practice and support each other.
Having that sense of community can make a huge difference.
So it's like having a team of cheerleaders cheering you on every step of the way.
Exactly. And remember, this whole thinking in English thing is a journey, not a destination.
Yeah, it's about making it a sustainable part of your life.
The sources are all about being patient with yourself, embracing the ups and downs, and just keeping moving forward.
So even if you have a bad day or a bad week, don't give up.
Just keep practicing and keep believing in yourself. You got this.
All right, so before we dive into some specific examples from the sources, I want to leave you with this question. What's one area of your life where you think being able to think in English could make a real difference?
Would it be in your career, your personal relationships, your ability to travel and experience the world? Take a moment to think about that.
Because even small steps towards thinking in English can have a huge impact on your life.
So let's dive into some of those steps and see how we can start making this a reality.
And we'll do that right after the break.
Sounds good.
Welcome back. So remember that idea of labeling things around you in English?
Oh yeah, that one. It's so simple but so effective.
The sources suggest using this technique when you're grocery shopping, like mentally label everything you see. Apples, milk, bread, even that tempting chocolate cake in the bakery section.
Chocolate cake. See, you're already thinking in English.
Uh-huh, very true. And it's not just about groceries. You can use this technique for any activity, like getting ready in the morning, toothbrush, mirror, that shirt I really need to iron.
It's about turning your daily routine into a vocabulary workout.
And the sources talk about using visualization when you're planning your day, too.
Oh yeah, instead of making a mental to-do list in your native language, you'd actually picture yourself doing each activity and label it in English.
So like going to the gym, meeting with my boss, finally finishing that book I started months ago.
It's like turning your schedule into a mental movie, complete with English narration.
That's such a cool idea. And the sources emphasize being as specific as possible with your visualization.
Oh yeah, like instead of just picturing yourself going to the gym, imagine the actual exercises you'll be doing, the equipment you'll be using, even the music you'll be listening to.
The more details you add, the more memorable it becomes.
And it's not just about visualizing your schedule. You can use this technique to think through any scenario in English.
That's so helpful. So we've got labeling, visualizing. What other techniques do the sources recommend?
Well, they talk about trying some thought exercises to really get those English thinking muscles working.
Oh, like what kind of exercises?
Things like creating stories in your head, having imaginary conversations, or even just describing your day. All in English, of course.
And That sounds like a fun way to challenge yourself.
It is. It helps you develop flexibility and spontaneity with the language.
And it's a great way to practice without feeling self-conscious.
Exactly. Because no one else has to know what's going on in your head.
Uh-huh, exactly.
And even with all these techniques, it's important to remember that learning a language, it's not always going to be easy.
Yeah, for sure. There are going to be times when you, like, totally blank on a word, or you make a mistake, or you just feel completely lost.
Exactly. And the sources they actually talk about this, they remind us that even native English speakers make mistakes. It's all part of the process.
Right. It's like learning to ride a bike. You're going to fall a few times before you get the hang of it.
Exactly. It's all about shifting your perspective and seeing those mistakes as opportunities to learn and grow.
So instead of getting frustrated when you mess up, you could use those moments to analyze what went wrong and figure out how to do better next time.
Yeah, you're turning those mental speed bumps into valuable lessons.
I like that.
Yeah.
And, one thing that really stood out to me in the sources was their advice on dealing with those moments when you just can't seem to find the right word.
Oh, yeah, that tip of the tongue feeling, it can be so frustrating.
It's like your brain just completely freezes up and you're left standing there like a deer in headlights.
Uh-huh, exactly. Well, the sources suggest using simpler words, descriptions, or even gestures to get your point across.
So it's about being resourceful and finding a way to communicate even when your vocabulary fails you.
Exactly. It's like that classic game show where you have to describe a word without actually saying it, you know?
Oh yeah, like taboo.
Exactly. You have to get creative and think outside the box.
And sometimes that process of searching for different words or phrases can actually help you understand the language better.
Right, you're forced to explore different nuances of meaning, and that can really deepen your understanding.
It's like you're expanding your mental map of the language.
Exactly. And remember, the goal isn't to sound like a walking dictionary, it's to communicate effectively and connect with others on a human level.
Right. It's about using language as a tool to build relationships, share ideas, and experience the world in a richer, more meaningful way.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of practice, the inevitability of making mistakes, and the power of being resourceful. But what about motivation? How do we stay focused on this journey of thinking in English, especially when it feels challenging?
That's a great question. And the sources actually offer some really valuable advice on staying motivated and keeping that momentum going.
Oh, like what?
Well, one key takeaway is to focus on your intrinsic motivation. Finding those personal reasons why you want to learn English and connecting with the joy of the learning process itself.
So it's less about external rewards, like getting a good grade on a test or impressing other people.
Exactly. It's more about that internal satisfaction of being able to understand a movie without subtitles or having a conversation with someone from another country.
Right. It's about those moments when you realize, hey, I can actually do this.
And the sources emphasize the importance of celebrating those small victories along the way.
Oh, yeah. Those little wins can make a big difference. Like, did you finally understand a podcast episode without having to rewind it 5 times? Or did you manage to order food at a restaurant without completely butchering the pronunciation?
Exactly. Those are all wins worth celebrating.
It's like giving yourself a mental high five every time you make progress.
Yep. And those little celebrations can really add up and keep you feeling motivated and encouraged.
Okay, so intrinsic motivation, celebrating smalls, wins, anything else?
Yeah, the sources also talk about the importance of finding ways to make learning English fun and engaging.
Okay, that sounds way more appealing than just drilling grammar rules and memorizing vocabulary lists.
Right, it's about finding activities that you genuinely enjoy and that make you want to keep coming back for more.
So, like, what kind of activities are we talking about?
It could be anything from watching your favorite TV shows in English with subtitles to listening to podcasts about topics you're passionate about.
Or even reading books or playing video games in English?
Exactly. The key is to find something that you find enjoyable and that doesn't feel like work.
Because when you're having fun, you're more likely to stick with it.
And you're also more likely to learn effectively.
Right, because your brain is more engaged when you're enjoying yourself.
And another important tip is to connect with other learners.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Like joining a language exchange group, attending an online forum, or even just chatting with a friend who's also learning English.
It's about creating a sense of community and shared purpose.
Yeah, and you can learn so much from each other's experiences, tips, and strategies.
It's a win-win situation, and it can make the journey a lot more enjoyable.
So it's like having a team of cheerleaders cheering you on every step of the way.
Exactly. And remember, the sources are all about making this a sustainable journey, not a sprint to the finish line.
Right. It's about finding a pace that works for you and sticking with it.
And it's about being patient with yourself and embracing those ups and downs.
Because progress isn't always linear. Some days you'll feel like you're making huge strides, and other days you'll feel like you're barely moving forward.
But the important thing is to keep moving forward, even if it's just one small step at a time.
So don't get discouraged if you have a bad day or even a bad week. Just keep practicing and keep believing in yourself.
You've got this.
All right, so before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. What's one small but significant step you can take today to start making this whole thinking in English thing a reality in your life?
Could it be setting aside 5 minutes each day to think in English? Could it be joining an online discussion group? Or could it be challenging yourself to write a short story or a poem in English?
Whatever it is, make it a challenge that excites you, that stretches you just outside your comfort zone, and that you can realistically commit to.
Because remember, even small, consistent actions can lead to remarkable results over time.
So embrace the challenge, enjoy the journey, and never stop exploring the incredible possibilities that open up when you unlock the power of thinking in English.
And we'll explore those possibilities even further in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
You know, it's really amazing to think about all the things that become possible when you can think in English.
Yeah, the sources really highlight that, like transformative power. It goes way beyond just understanding and speaking the language, you know?
Yeah, it's like you're not just learning a language, you're unlocking a whole new way of seeing the world.
Exactly. And one of the articles had this really interesting comparison. It said that thinking in English is kind of like learning to ride a bike.
Oh, I like that. At first, it's all wobbly and awkward, and you might even fall a few times.
Yeah, and it'd be so easy to just give up and go back to walking. But if you stick with it, something amazing happens.
You start to find your balance, you gain momentum, and eventually you're just gliding along effortlessly.
It becomes second nature, you know?
And that's what these sources are all about, helping us reach that point where thinking in English feels as natural as breathing.
It's like the language becomes a part of you.
And we've talked about so many different techniques and strategies, but it seems like that idea of immersion is really key.
Yeah, creating an environment where you're constantly surrounded by English and you're always challenging yourself to think in the language.
But the sources actually take this concept of immersion a step further.
Oh, really? In what way?
They talk about creating not just an English-speaking environment, but an English-thinking environment.
That's interesting. What does that look like in practice?
It's about making a conscious effort to shift your internal dialogue to English, to really make it the language you think in.
So it's not just about what you're hearing and speaking, but about what's going on in your head.
Exactly. And it's about finding ways to engage with English content on a deeper level.
So like instead of just passively watching a movie in English, you'd actively analyze the dialogue, think about the characters' motivations, and try to understand the themes.
Yeah, or instead of just listening to a podcast, you'd really engage with the ideas presented, maybe even have a mental debate with the host.
It's about making your brain work in English.
And it doesn't have to be super complicated. It could be as simple as setting aside a few minutes each day to just think in English.
Like journaling, brainstorming ideas, or just letting your mind wander, but
Yeah.
doing it all in English.
It's like creating a mental space where English is the native language.
And the more you do that, the more natural it will become.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of thinking in English, I want to leave you with one final challenge. What's one small step you can take today to start building that English thinking environment for yourself?
It could be anything from committing to thinking in English for just 5 minutes each day, to joining an online discussion group, or even challenging yourself to write a short story or a poem in English.
Just find something that excites you, something that pushes you a little bit outside your comfort zone and that you can realistically stick with.
Because remember, even those small actions can lead to amazing results over time.
So keep practicing, keep exploring, and never stop believing in your ability to unlock the power of thinking in English.
It's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. And until next time, happy learning.